familiar with what a wave folder is, the first iteration that I know of it being implemented was the Buchla easel in 1973. And basically what it does, if you can imagine a sine wave, the wave folder just takes the top of the hump of the waveform of a sine wave and flips it over. So the wave starts to go up, and then it dips down, and then it goes up again, and then it goes down. And so basically you're creating a much more complex waveform than a sine wave when you start bending the top downward. Anytime you change a wave shape, you are changing the timbral content, the harmonic content. You're changing the timbre and the harmonic content in that wave. So a wave folder is a really interesting way to take a simple waveform or even a complex waveform and make a more harmonically rich waveform. So if let's do an example of this. Let's go to sine wave. And we start to turn the shape knob, which is our wave folder. You can hear all of a sudden there's a brightness to it. And when you can hear brightness, that means there's a lot more harmonics. So just there, that's just our sine. And I just turned the wave folder. I imagine you heard it just like work its way through a huge amount of timbral outcomes. And that's the thing that is really truly amazing, is that you now have all of these different potential waveforms that are output by this thing. So if we just move this and stop, you can hear what I'm talking about. Okay, and so that's still just our sine wave. If we go on to, say, triangle, you're going to get different timbres. Kind of similar. Still different. Let's go to something more obviously different, like saw. Or down to our square. And don't forget that we have things in between all of this. So here's our bent triangle. And let us not forget that, before we go into that, let's choose the... Now I'm getting all the waveforms coming into this thing. With each note press, we were getting a different waveform that was being folded by the wave folder in a different way. So, yeah, extremely complex output. Fascinating. But you also might have noticed, as I was playing, it sounds cool when you turn the thing. So, seeing that, we have a shape CV knob. So if we turn this up, it is normal to the LFO. We're going to have the LFO basically doing the turning of this shape knob for us. And so, yeah, you have the ability to voltage control the output of the wave folder through its input. And we haven't talked about the inputs yet, but they are down here. If you go to the shape input and then connect it to, say, oscillator 3's output, Anyway, this is just an example of one way to modulate it. Obviously, we could be using the envelope, or even without it plugged in, we could just be using the LFO. Typically, of course, there's a square wave output for the LFO. We have a lot of different modulation ways to work through that wave folding, but it is a guaranteed way to get incredibly complex timbres, that really cool, wave folding effect that we were just listening to. Whatever interesting sample and hold, whatever interesting control voltage you can put in there, you can be having the voltage turn this knob in cool and interesting ways. Let us also not forget that we have the ability down here in the patch panel to basically, here, let's put the output of Oscillator 2's output into our sync input. And now we have traditional sync. So if we want to take, let's say, envelope ADSR out and put it into our pitch. Into our FM modulation, which we haven't talked about. Let's we can also get your traditional sync effect, which we've jumped onto. But yeah, any way that you alter the pitch of oscillator 1 when it is synced to oscillator 2, we are forcing the waveform of oscillator 1 to restart every time oscillator 2, in this case, its waveform restarts. And then if we change the pitch of oscillator 1, it has to, whatever pitch it's at, it has to restart its waveform at the point where oscillator 2 does, and it creates this traditional sync sound that we have. But what we didn't talk about is the fact that we have FM, linear FM going on with this as well, and all we have to do to get that is to turn this up, the FM knob. So it is normaled to the LFO, so obviously you're hearing it go crazy. So if we turn up the speed of the LFO, but keep in mind it is frequency modulation. So like we could take the output of some other oscillator, put it into our FM input, and we can get whatever that whatever the output from that oscillator is currently doing. Right now we have a low frequency modulation that is actually being modulated, so we'll get this weird waveform. Anyway, so of course you can frequency modulate your oscillator in any way that you'd like. In addition to all of this, we also have several different outputs. We have, first of all, a means to control the pitch. So for example, if you don't want to use MIDI, but you do want to use some other controller, you can put your volt per octave input into this pitch and control the pitch of the oscillator. We have the FM, which we just covered by putting stuff into it. We have the sync, which we just covered by putting the output of another oscillator, but you can put anything into that. It has a special amplifier in it, so you can put a sine wave into there and it will track it and force your oscillator to be a slave to that other oscillator, which is cool. We have the shape input, which we talked about. A voltage put into the shape input is going to be the same as like a robot hand moving the shape knob, which is a really cool outcome. We have a sine output of all these oscillators. So you might have your oscillator, the timbre of your oscillator going out into the filter to be whatever, but you can also take the sine wave out of the oscillator and use it as a modulation source elsewhere, or a means of like post filter giving you some bass back into your tone or whatever. This is kind of like what Don Buchla did on the 200E series, having a sine wave output for you to use in different ways than the timbral output of your oscillator. And of course, we have the output itself. So it almost feels wrong to say this is the oscillator, because, in any of these instances where we have a modular synthesizer, the output possibilities are so vast because, all of these different means of modulation, and in this case, all of the different waveforms we have, let alone the waveforms we get by wave folding. I mean, your possibilities are incredibly infinite, but I guess more important than that is to keep in mind that the oscillator has a really, really great tone. And I mean, I would love to go through and play, each of these waveforms, which we listen to, and then go through the whole breadth of the shape, the wave folding, so that you could hear all of the various tones that are possible, but there's just too many. But anyway, so these incredibly functional and unique oscillators have this great tone. They have all of this functionality, and of course, they are modular. So these are the oscillators found on the Pittsburgh Modular Taiga.